Do you ever have those days where you have your day totally planned out and then it's almost like life has other plans for you and you have to completely pivot from what you were originally intending to do? Well, that's exactly what's going on today, and I thought I would go ahead and bring you along anyway, even though it's not 100% what I had originally planned. Welcome to Blooming Wildwood Homestead. Today we are going to head out and look at the peppers and getting those canned and dehydrated, but that's not the only thing we're going to be working on today. Last night I found out that my freezer had gone out in the house, and unfortunately I lost some of my product in there, but I am able to go ahead and save some of the chicken that was still partially frozen. So I've thawed the rest of that out. I'm gonna throw it into jars and get that canned up, so at least I didn't lose everything that I had in the freezer. But it's definitely a major bummer, and I'm sad that I lost some of the food that I did in there, but it's better to be safe than to have food poisoning or food issues later on. So I knew it had to be taken care of, but it was not exactly what was on the agenda for today. So we'll be doing a few different things, but a little bit different than I'd originally intended. It's always a bummer when things like this happen, but we know inevitably at some point the freezers are going to go out. It's a good reminder to me to make sure that I am regularly checking the freezers just to make sure that everything's in good functioning order. The refrigerator still works just fine. It's that freezer portion that decided to go out. So it made me go check the other freezer I have to make sure that everything was working properly there. And if you don't get into your freezer every day, it might be worth checking out just to make sure that you have everything in proper working order. So for this project, I'm just gonna go ahead and cut the chicken into chunks that are about 2 inches, and we'll put them into pint jars. That'd be the amount that I would be most likely to use. That'll give me a few meals off of it. I'm putting them into wide mouth jars just because I find that wide mouth is a little easier to deal with when you have larger chunks of something, and then it's a little easier to get those chunks out of once you're going to use them. So that's why I like to put them in wide mouth. However, if I run out of wide mouth jars, I'll just use regular mouth. That'll be fine. So I figured we would just chat a little bit while I'm working on this project. What are some things that you have been working on around the homestead? Have you had some situations recently where maybe you had a project in mind, but you've ended up having to pivot to something new? I know it's getting to be that time of year where we're working on kind of preparing for the fall and winter season. Things have been kind of unseasonably warm here, which has been nice because we haven't had to start a fire or anything like that. But it's also been a pretty dry fall. We haven't had any rain of any substance for quite some time. And so we definitely could use some rain, which is a funny thing to be saying here in the Pacific Northwest, where we're known for having a bunch of rain. But the last couple of years, you know, this year we had a wet spring, but then once summer really took hold, it seems like things have just been really dry, which is interesting, and definitely noteworthy as we're kind of looking at things changing and trying to plan for the garden and what we're doing here on the homestead in the future. Weather does play a role in that, and if we continue to have very dry summers and even dry falls, it might just change the way that we do some of the things that we do around the homestead. Fortunately, I've had the ability to be able to take care of this today and salvage some of this chicken that I potentially could have lost. And as I've been going through that process, it makes me think just a little bit about emergency preparedness and some of the things that I've heard people say when it comes to having frozen items. So as you know, I do a fair amount of canning here. And canning is always going to have a longer shelf life, in my opinion, than what you have in the freezer. And what I've heard some people say is that they're not too worried about canning their meats or anything like that, because if the power goes out for an extended period of time, or if something happens, they're just going to go ahead and can up all of their meat. And while that sounds like a viable option and potentially a good idea, I would have to argue about the practicality of that, because if you are if you have a large freezer, I'm just dealing with the small one that was in the house that is part of the refrigerator. So if you're dealing with a large freezer full of meat or food, I don't really know how you would be able to get all of that canned without a good portion of it spoiling or going bad, because one, you'll be working in less than ideal conditions. You won't have the running water. You won't have, potentially, depending on what kind of a stove you have, you won't have your stove set up just readily available. So you might have to go to whatever your backup plan is, which will require setting something up. So you just won't have ideal conditions that way. And then when it comes to canning meat, you can only fit so many jars into a pressure canner, and meat takes much longer to pressure can. The chicken will take 1 hour and 15 minutes at 11 pounds in order to process completely. So that's just a small portion that that's going to take 1 hour and 15 minutes. So if you have a large capacity freezer and it's full of meat, I just don't know that it would make sense that you could can everything up. I don't know, maybe it can be done, and maybe you have some experience with it. Let me know in the comments below what your past experience has been, but you would definitely have to have alternative cooking sources, maybe some extra propane on hand for whatever kind of stove you're going to use, probably a generator to keep things going for at least a little bit until you can get things canned up. But it seems like it might be a little more complex than I've heard some people let on when it comes to trying to deal with those kinds of situations. So as soon as this is finished processing, we'll head out and look at the pepper plants. They definitely look like they're kind of headed out, and I think I'm going to just harvest everything that I can off of them today. And then my thought is that I will do a combination of dehydration and canning. I like having the small containers of diced green chilies. Those are great to add to a lot of different dishes that I'm cooking, and so I definitely want to do some of that. I have some 4-ounce containers that I think we'll utilize for that project, and I've seen some people put them in half pints, but I don't foresee myself using that much at one time. And when I'm canning, I like to put things in portions that I am likely to use at one time, just so that things don't go to waste. It's one thing to have cooked leftovers in the fridge, but it's another thing to have ingredients that you're going to need to use in another dish. If you just cooked something, what's the likelihood that you're going to use that ingredient within the next day or two? So I like to just kind of keep my options open that way. Well, we finally made it out here to the pepper patch. I think we're gonna start with some jalapenos and just see how that goes. So I'm gonna start by just picking those. I've got my pod, and then I'm going to use a glove because of the quantity of peppers I'm going to be picking. And when I work with canning them, they just have this oil that's naturally on them, and if you get that on your hands, it can really burn your hands. But also, if for some reason you touch your eyes after you've been touching the pepper oils, it's not going to be a good thing. I have had times when I have tried to put my contacts in or get my contacts out after having done some work with peppers, and you just don't want to even try to go there. So I'm going to take all the precautions necessary and wear some gloves. This project might take more than I thought. This is full, and I only picked 3 pepper plants, and I didn't even pick them clean. So these are all jalapeno. We'll go ahead and see what we can do with these guys. Well, after picking 3 plants, I can't believe I have this whole basket full. So we're gonna go ahead and roast these peppers at 400 degrees. That's gonna make them a little bit soft. I can choose whether or not I wanna leave the skins on. Since I know these are all organic, I don't have any problem leaving the skin on them. And then we'll dice them up and put them into little jars. Now, I am going to pick out some of the best specimens because I do want to make sure that I am saving seed from them. So I'm going to take my reddest ones that I think are some of the nicest peppers. I don't know if it's going to be this one, but something like that. And then I can save seed from them in the future. I don't want to go ahead and roast them if I want to save the seed from them, as that will kill the seed. So the ones that I choose to save out for seed saving, I will dehydrate, and that way I won't have to worry about losing the seeds. Here's the first batch of beautiful peppers. I'm gonna let them cool in the bowl. It's the next day, and I just wanted to finish up with a couple of things in regards to the peppers. I didn't quite get everything filmed after I went ahead and roasted the peppers up. So once they were roasted and cooled just a touch, I went ahead and took the stem off, took the seeds out, and then was able to dice them and put them into the jars. Now, like I shared earlier, I did use the 4-ounce jars for the most part, just because that's kind of the perfect amount of peppers for me to be able to use. So I packed these full of the chopped peppers and went ahead and covered them with a little bit of boiling water just to make sure that they had the liquid they needed before putting them into the pressure canner at 11 pounds for 35 minutes. I think this will be a great addition, and just one way that I can go ahead and preserve some of that bountiful harvest. While they don't have to cook for a long time, it does take a bit of work to get everything roasted and get the peppers all chopped up. So that was a little bit more time intensive than I had anticipated, but I think it will be well worth it in the end. I hope today's video was helpful to you. Don't forget to check your freezer, just periodically at least, to make sure that everything is in good working order. And I would love to hear in the comments below about some of the ways that you might be preserving your peppers, or what have you done in the past when you've had a situation where your freezer went out and you had to deal with that. Were you able to salvage some of the food? Were you able to preserve it quickly? Or what was kind of your experience with that, if you have had that experience before? If today's video was helpful, don't forget to click like. I'd love to have you subscribe and be part of our community here at Blooming Wildwood Homestead. Until next time, bye everyone.